alumni engagement. We are so glad you are able to join us today to learn from our wonderful speakers. It is now my privilege to introduce our new IES Abroad President and CEO, Dr. Gregory Hess. Dr. Hess comes to us from a career at Wabash College, where he was president for 7 years. Before this, he served as Dean of Faculty and Vice President of Academic Affairs at Claremont McKenna College in California. Greg served as a consultant for Honda Motors of North America and as a member of Ohio's Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. He also has served as a visiting scholar at the Federal Reserve Banks of San Francisco, St. Louis, Cleveland, and Kansas City, the Bank of Japan, Korea University, and the IMF Institute and the Hoover Institution. In addition, Greg has held teaching positions at Carnegie Mellon University, the University of Kansas, St. John's College, the University of Cambridge, London Business School, and Oberlin College. Greg's academic and business background is a great asset to all at IES Abroad as we work to build the future of study abroad for college students around the world. Thank you, Greg, for joining us for today's virtual alumni event.
Well, thank you very much, Jody, and let me welcome everyone to today's event. That includes, great alumni of our London program, friends of IES, IES staff members and board members around the world. We welcome you. And, I'll be taking questions and giving some remarks at the end of this wonderful event. So at this point, I'd like to just introduce, the Center Director of our London program, John Oakey. John has been a really kind of distinguished and kind of iconic member of the IES community. He's been the director of two different centers at IES, both in Siena and also in London. It shows just kind of the multifaceted nature of him and his background, having both lived in the U.S. and abroad, having been grown up both in the U.S. and abroad, and also the fact that he's had a very important academic career both at BYU doing undergraduate and graduate work, as well as doing some postgraduate work in Geneva at the UN. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce John, and he will help to usher the rest of the program. And I look forward to having a little bit of Q&A with you at the end of today's program. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Greg. I really appreciate that. And I also want to offer my sincere welcome on behalf of IES London to this first alumni event that we've done. We're currently somewhat in a state of hibernation here in London, although definitely not sleeping it off. We desperately miss having students and are doing all possible to capitalize on this time to rethink some of our systems and offerings to determine how we can continue to move forward with the pro-positive attitude and ethos. Just a couple of words about London and the UK as it relates to COVID. We had a strict and extended lockdown and did very well in suppressing viral transmission. Over the last weeks, as things have opened up, our numbers have quite logically started trending upwards as well. And steps have been taken to again introduce more targeted measures across the country. Somewhat oddly, London is faring better than many other parts of the UK, although restrictions have recently been reintroduced here also. Like most countries, we continue to play the seesaw of limiting infections while keeping an eye on the economic fallout of closure. The UK government has given quite good financial support, however, to businesses over the past months, and this will continue until at least April of 2021. And IES London has benefited from this help, for which we've been very grateful. So I just want to say a couple of words about that, a question that's always on the top of everybody's mind. We, of course, hope that as soon as the situation changes for the better, that all of you are planning a trip to come and visit us here in London and IES. I'd like to just introduce our panel speakers to you, after which I'll turn the floor directly over to them. Bear with me as I introduce all three of them so that I don't have to interrupt after each intervention. First is Diana Pierce Burgess, has spent the last 25 years in journalism, politics, public relations, and philanthropy. Her early experience goes from the Clinton White House to the front lines of national television news at Foreign Policy magazine and as senior producer at ABC News Nightline, where she earned 5 Emmy Awards, a Peabody, and the Thurgood Marshall Award for Justice. She relocated to London 10 years ago, where she consulted on PR and media strategy with philanthropic organizations like MTV's Staying Alive Foundation, and she has also lectured at IES London. In January of 2017, she co-founded a startup and nonprofit called Press Forward, whose goal is to change the culture in the workplace, creating equality and promoting diversity, beginning with newsrooms. This is a US-based organization, so she knows all too well what working from home on Zoom looks like. Our second speaker is David Nida, who is a lawyer, a published poet, lecturer, and international speaker specializing in cultural leadership. Based in the UK, he is a commentator on race, politics, mental health, and the arts. An advocate for human rights and an expert in organizational development and mental health, Dave has worked with numerous organizations, companies, and religious institutions. Dave was included in Black Enterprise's list of the top 10 most powerful Black men in Britain and was selected by the BBC to provide perspective and comment on the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. As an advocate and art consultant for the largest mental health institution in Europe, Dave has spearheaded the dialogue around race, art, identity, and healing in mental health between patients, staff, architects, and Black artists. Dave has published 1 book and 4 audio CDs of poetry. Last but not least is Mike Semilla, who's a senior currently at Indiana University and will be graduating this spring with a degree in finance. Mike studied abroad and did an internship with IES London in the summer of 2019. Mike will be working for Perella Weinberg Partners and Healthcare M&A Advisory in New York City upon graduation. And without further ado, I'll turn the time over to Diana.
Hi, so nice to be talking to everybody from wherever you are. I have a lot of ground to cover, so if it's okay with everybody, I'm just going to get started. I tend to talk quickly, so bear with me. I'll try to slow down. But I just wanted to start, I mean, basically what I'm going to be talking about, I think you already saw the headline, is I'm going to talk a little bit about Brexit, and then I'm also going to be talking about COVID and the effects of both of those on the UK right now. And then I just want to end on sort of personal notes of my own experiences working from home and under COVID and all of that. So that's what I'm talking about today. So Brexit, let's just start with that. It's just a political theater for everybody else except us. It's at its best, you know. For us, it's nail biting. But I think for everybody else, it's been fascinating to watch what's been happening here in the UK. We really are in the last minutes, seconds of this, and it really is coming down to the wire. There's been tons of posturing on both sides, lots of games of chicken. Who's going to blink first? Recently, Boris Johnson called it quits and walked away. Both sides have gotten into their trenches and dug in. So the EU, of course, doesn't want to, make it easy. They don't want to have any other country follow in our footsteps. So they're trying to make it very difficult. But last night, the talks are back on again. The UK government said they're ready and willing to negotiate and welcome the EU team to come to London. So I think actually the EU negotiator just landed in London today and will start those negotiations again. So this is a back and forth that happens all the time. But in this case, what's changed? Michel Barnier, who's the EU negotiator, he tweeted some really key statements this week, which I think is a little bit promising for those of us like John and myself who are looking for the silver lining or the hope that this will be a deal at the end of all this. He said they are willing to work day and night, around the clock, and until the very last moment to reach a deal. For the UK, there's been just a couple of key sticking points. It's actually 98% of the deal is done. It's been agreed upon. There's just a couple of very small things that haven't, well, rather big things, but that haven't. One is the issue of sovereignty. Another is the fisheries. And there's also the fact that the EU has thus far refused to start writing the joint legal texts, even though the large majority of the deal has been done. So Barnier this week spoke of working on the legal texts. And more importantly, he spoke about the sovereignty issue as being an important issue that they have to come to agreement on. So it's the first time the EU has actually made a move in the right direction. He also said that the EU, and this is really important, that the EU will have to make compromises as well. And it's always been acknowledged that the UK has to make all the compromises, that not the EU. But he did mention that this week, which is a very good sign. But it will be, as John and I have been talking about over here in London, it will be I think an 11th hour deal. If I had to predict what's going to happen, I certainly hope that's what's going to happen, because no deal, I think, will just be a disaster. So what does it mean for the UK? I do think obviously it comes down to our trade with Europe. Europe is our most important partner, and that's going to be the key for us. I'm just going to hold this up here. But also important are going to be new deals and partnerships. So we do have, the UK is seeking partnerships in Asia, in China, Japan, Singapore. They sent negotiators back and forth over there. Malaysia, Asian countries, Australia. We're looking for a really big trade deal with the US. That's going to be very beneficial to us and really important. It's just hard to tell right now what that's going to look like and what it's going to be, because we don't know who the president or the administration is going to be. So that's still yet to be seen, though that's top priority for us. But I think the most important thing about Brexit, what's really hurting us, is the uncertainty. And I think that's been the key in all of this when it comes to businesses and other people trying to figure out how to navigate what's happening after Brexit. It's the uncertainty. So you've seen that already. Airbus is considering moving to Germany or France. Sony, whose offices are right down near me in Hammersmith, they have their main European offices in Hammersmith. They're moving them to the Netherlands. Tesla, Elon Musk has decided to change the base from the UK, which he had said he was going to do, to Germany. And that's because of Brexit. So I think those are the kinds of things we're going to see a lot of. Vodafone, Visa are strongly considering moving. It's a long list. Nissan, Siemens, it's a very long list. And I think that's the area in business that we have to be concerned about. There is an interesting area of growth, which, and doing some research on this, I did find was rather interesting. The NHS, which is our National Health Service, and this is before COVID, by the way. They're an area where there are vacancies and they will see growth. It's predicted that there will be 50,000 new nursing vacancies by the end of 2021. And that was before COVID. So with COVID, that will likely increase. And then also other healthcare professionals and jobs will be needed as well, because a lot of our healthcare professionals come from overseas and they're on visas. And there's actually a story today on the BBC while I was sitting here getting ready for this about, I think it was a doctor from Iran who has his family here, his kids and his wife, and he's a GP and he works here and he's on a visa, and he got COVID in September and he's on a ventilator. And he's about to get kicked out of the country with his family. So those are the issues, just anecdotally, that we're facing. But I guess, strangely, on the positive side, there are going to be a lot of healthcare positions opening up. So it's still, I think, it's still to be determined whether it's going to be a positive or negative effect. John Lewis is a major retailer here. They've warned that they may have to increase the prices. Sainsbury's is a major grocery store here, chain, and they said they're going to try not to pass the increased import prices over to the consumer. So it's very interesting. But the statistic is that 79% of imported food in the UK supermarkets comes from the EU. So it really is a waiting game to see what happens. And again, anecdotally, in terms of small businesses, I have a friend who has a small business. He owns a kitchen design company, and he has two main products. And one is kitchen cabinets that are custom built in the UK and sold here. And the other is a German prefab company that builds the cabinets there and gets shipped. With the custom built ones, the wood is oak and walnut, and it comes from Eastern Europe, from Hungary or Poland. So either way, either product line that he has, he doesn't know what's going to happen after Brexit. He has wood that he has to transfer from Hungary and Poland, or prefab kitchen units that are coming from Germany. And without knowing what the duties and the tariffs and the taxes are going to be, he doesn't know what to charge his clients. So it's that's one person times hundreds of thousands of small business owners who really are struggling because they really don't know what's going to happen. But I guess on the plus side, for him at least, he has been extremely busy for the last 7 months, because a surprising plus to COVID has been home improvement. As I think we all know, we're all living and working from home, at least here in the UK. I don't know how strict it has been where in your areas, but mostly everybody's working from home if you can. And so that means that your workplace becomes the place that you're never leaving. So people want to make home improvements. They want to invest in their homes. And also a lot of people aren't traveling. So the money that they were going to use for traveling, they're making home improvements. So interestingly, one of the areas that we've seen increases and people who have been very busy and in big demand because of COVID has been construction workers, builders, interior designers, landscapers, people like that. So it's an interesting side effect, I suppose. But moving on to COVID and how that has affected us, both positive and positive and negatives. I do want to just say as an overview on this, it's really important to remember that as far as I've read, and I've read a lot about other countries and what they're doing, no government or country, to me, has gotten this right. It's really hard to compare apples to oranges. And I think everybody keeps trying to do that. If, for example, the UK is 3 times smaller than California, 3 times smaller than California. And we have a population of 66 million. And California has a population of 39 million. So we are very small and very crowded. It just doesn't add up. Everybody looks at Sweden as a great model. Again, geographically, it is a little larger than California, and yet it has a population of 10 million, which is the size of London. So, these are the things that I think are really important to remember. New Zealand, everybody says New Zealand is the gold standard. Same size geographically as the UK, and only 5 million people. So I think it's really important to understand that the governments in the world are struggling. We have to remember this is a global pandemic, not like we've never seen before. And I think the economic and social and public health challenges are truly unparalleled. So I just felt that was important to say. But the good and the bad, let's start with the bad in terms of COVID. Here in the UK, it's pretty obvious. I'm sure it's the same everywhere else where you guys are. The arts have struggled tremendously. The theaters, the plays, the cinemas, the movies, plexes closed down here, museums, and all these places that rely on face-to-face interaction and all of the vendors that are surrounding them. The film industry has been crushed. I have 2 friends that work in film industry. One's a set decorator. She worked on The King's Speech and many movies that you would know. And she just worked on the last Star Wars. And she was in lockdown and just finally started up. Everybody went in lockdown, literally. Every film set shut down for 7 months. I mean, everybody did. And she just started up again in September. And she has to work 4 days a week. And then on Thursdays, they do a COVID test for the whole set. And then everybody goes home. And then they wait to get the results and they start up again on Monday. And in fact, she and 2 other people in her department got COVID and they didn't even know they had it. They got tested and had no clue. So they had to self-isolate for 2 weeks and then come back to work. I have another friend who's a cinematographer. He's worked on Black Mirror and a whole bunch of other things. And he was working in New Zealand on an HBO series for 5 months and just got back from New Zealand in February as a cinematographer and went into lockdown, and he has no job. He doesn't have anything else lined up. So it's really hard for the film industry. TV's doing great, as we all know. The airline industry and travel, trains, buses, cruise ships, travel agents, they're all doing terribly. We know about the huge job slashes and cuts across the board with Heathrow and Gatwick and everywhere else. It really is a job industries that have face-to-face contact. pubs and restaurants, hospitality, hair and beauty salons, small local sporting events, you know, the ones that don't have the deep pockets like Liverpool or Manchester. I mean, they're all struggling. Charities, people don't want to get, you know, part with their money in a time of economic disparity. So they're not giving money to charities. So it's tough. It's really tough. But the positives, which I think I'd like to end on, are interesting. You know, they're industries that are definitely no surprise to all of us, because we are all using them, at least here. I know John and myself are all almost every day. So the courier service industry is doing very well. They're booming. Video downloading, streaming, online entertainment, video games. I mean, we've all sat and binge watched Netflix over lockdown and everything else. Online dating apps, online grocery shopping and delivery. I'm beholden to Sainsbury's and Tesco's and Ocado, which is our online delivery service. So online shopping in general has done very well. Amazon, they doubled their quarterly profit at the end of July, despite COVID. And their first quarter profits were unprecedented already. And then their second quarter, everybody thought they were going to go down, and they didn't. 7 days ago was the Amazon Prime Day, I think, and there was some promotion they do, and they had a 60% increase in sales from last year. So it's no surprise. Everybody's working and living at home, and they're just ordering stuff all the time. So I think another key area, which is really important, and particularly for this audience, which has grown a lot, is online education and training. And homeschooling, tutoring, lessons in any subject that you can think of, music, a new language. My nephew is a session guitarist, and he's out of work because there's nowhere to work. So he started doing guitar lessons online, and he is more busy and making more money than he ever has. My next door neighbor is an actress that works in the West End in theater, and she started doing acting lessons. So, I mean, there are those entrepreneurial people who are thinking about how do we take advantage of this lockdown, and what do we do with our skills that we normally do and apply them online. I think that's, you know, very key. Takeaways and deliveries, we're all keeping those alive. Meditation apps apparently have gone up. Training equipment, which is a big one in our house. Home stationary bikes, weights, erg machines, all of those. My daughter has been trying to get barbells for 6 months, and they're sold out nonstop because she wants to do training. So those are obvious things. Cleaning products, nursing and healthcare. People have started doing staycations. So there are some pluses in the travel industry a little bit, because there are more localized vacations. Health resorts. I happen to be at a health resort right now, and people are realizing that COVID is the wake-up call they should have gotten, and everybody is going to those. The tech world is very busy. They're doing well. Everybody can work from home in the tech world, generally speaking. Finance is doing very well. People are hiring. My husband works in finance, and he's hired 2 people since lockdown. He's never met them. You know, it's just strange and crazy. It's a really strange and crazy world. I think entrepreneurs are key as well. I think they are the ones that are they're opportunists. They're looking for an advantage, you know, something that they can see that others don't. And I can go into a story later about somebody I know who started an online organization during lockdown because she saw a hole. She lives in New York, and she saw a hole for that needed filling, and she's done it, and it's doing very well. So I think there's those kinds of stories out there. For me personally, just to try to understand, I have been working and living from home for 3 years, working with Press Forward. So this is not new to me. What's interesting is no travel at all. I mean, I had to travel every once in a while. I had to go back to New York or to DC to work with my co-founders who live in San Francisco and New York and DC and Denver and South Carolina. But we started our organization and worked developing our goals and implementing them from Zoom and calls and meetings on different time zones. So I think the biggest, it's very rewarding, but it's also challenging. And I think the biggest rewards are that you're on your own time. You're really, as long as you get the job done and you're working and living in these circumstances, you can do it. I think the challenges have been under lockdown, and in working from home is you don't have connectivity in the same way that you normally do. And I think that has been the hardest thing, I think, for people, that if you have a misinterpreted email or misread email, you can't just go knock on the person's door and say, did you mean to say this? Or how did that, I wasn't sure what your tone was there. And you can't do that when you're all working in these separate boxes. And that I found over the 3 years that I've been doing this, that to be the key issue. You don't have this communal area where you get to see somebody face to face and understand their expressions, and really get to understand how they work and operate. So I think that's been hard. And then the last thing I would say that's also been challenging is that it is somewhat lonely. You don't have anybody to chat with. There's no office mate. There's no people in your space, unless they are, your family, and you don't want to talk to them. But, I think it's hard. And there are some mental health challenges that people face under lockdown as well. So that's, I hope, a good overview of everything. But I can come back and talk about any of these things more in depth. But I think that leads segues very nicely to David Nita, who is our next speaker, to speak about some of the mental health issues with lockdown and with COVID. So thank you.
Thank you, Diana, and what an excellent outline and about the issues that you covered on Brexit and COVID. And mentioning right at the end there the impact on mental well-being, which kind of segues into my section. But I think I haven't heard anything better, not from the government, not from an electorate. So thank you for that. I think I'll try to share my screen here so that we can go straight into a PowerPoint which I prepared earlier. So can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. So there are 3 graphics on this first page here. The two graphics at the top, the first one representing Brexit, the second one up there representing the pandemic, and then the one below is kind of like a representation of the impact on mental well-being for people, and that's across the piece. All these images are taken from the website. In the first image, we see all this image of the UK being ripped apart from the European Union, and that's what happened in when we had our Brexit vote, 2015. And I remember the following day, it was a sad day for me. I remember the following day, I felt instinctively I needed to go to a shop or store. I went to a Polish store and I wanted to purchase something. I wanted to have a conversation. I wanted to try and bring those threads back together. And if you can imagine, you can do this sort of presentation yourself, because you can imagine what it will mean for people who are settled in the UK and for UK residents settled in Europe, because home is such an important, it's probably the most important things for identity. Where is home? And the whole question of home was challenged for, well, we have about 3.5 million EU residents living here in the UK at the time, and so many British citizens living abroad, and everything was uncertain for them. And when home becomes a challenge, that's a huge sort of threat to your mental well-being. So you can imagine the issues that would have caused. There's also the issue around business uncertainty. There's also the whole idea of what did Brexit really mean? On both sides of that referendum, that you had people who voted genuinely, led by, what they thought was the best for the country. But the overwhelming message that I think people got from Brexit, people, especially people who are not English, and including people who are English, was that, you know, we're not welcome here, or we're not welcoming our friends here. So English people who felt that they wanted to embrace, people from the UK who felt that they wanted to embrace their neighbors, would have had a feeling in themselves that I thought I knew my nation. I thought I knew that the people here were welcoming and open-armed towards people from abroad. So that felt to me like the overwhelming feeling of it. And then people here would have, from Europe, from other parts of Europe, would have felt like, well, are my services not welcome here, my presence? And there were statements made by leaders of states, statements about, we're not going to accommodate queue jumpers. And the implication being that if you are here from Europe, you're jumping the queue, when actually this was a union. So now it's all up in the air. And I believe that this has created a lot of instability within the workplace, within families, within homes. You have to understand that this is a nation that there are so many intermarriage between nations, you know, between British people and people from the EU. And there are lots of questions around that. The government is trying to their level best to try and set those minds at ease, but anxieties have been created as a result. When we come to the COVID, I'll just mention COVID while we're here. As you can see the image of a kind of tsunami of COVID and overwhelming the NHS and people feeling pretty much overwhelmed. Well, the mental health fallout of all of this, you can think about lockdown, for example, which created a massive sort of mental health challenges for families in this country. If you live in a tower block, for example, if you lived in a house, probably wasn't so bad. If you had a big yard space, wasn't so bad. But if you lived in a small flat, there are issues associated with that, because there's the inability to access green space and to get fresh air, although the law did allow you to go outside and do exercise and so on. And thank goodness, and something I'll mention later, thank goodness we do have lots of parks in our city. And that's one thing that's absolutely a positive of the City of London in its design. I don't think there's anybody who lives in London who lives far from a park. But if you want to think about the home being sometimes an unsafe place, for example, if there's domestic abuse in that home, domestic violence, violence towards children, sexual abuse, all those things. So that raised the issues around isolation for people who live alone, issues around despair. COVID also took away, people died before their time in many ways, and that would have created a lot of bereavement for a lot of people. Dan also mentioned the arts and how that suffered. And you know that a lot of people get their mental well-being sorted out through the arts. And that went, pretty much. And so I'm going to talk about my response to that. And so, but on the plus side, we have to say that there were some theaters who offered free online content to people. So that was really something very positive. So let me just run through these slides really quickly. I just wanted to give you a reference here to a journal that talks about the psychological impact of mental well-being from the pandemic. And then I wanted to just bring attention to this. You'd have seen this many times, this quote, this statistic, 1 in 4. 1 in 4 people experience problems with sadness, stress, worry, and anxiety. This is from the World Health Organization. This is really about mental well-being. 1 in 4 people have a mental health problem. And that gets us to ask the question, is it you or is it me? Because in a room of 4, it's going to be you, it's going to be me, it's going to be somebody else, right? I actually want to posit a different way of thinking about mental well-being, and it's this. It's 1 in 1. It's all of us. I mean, it would be mistaken belief in believing that there's anybody out there who don't have challenges with regards to their mental well-being. If you should think about it yourself, you'll realize it's you. If I think about it myself, I realize it's me. If we think about it enough, we realize it's all of us. And so therefore, it's incumbent on all of us to kind of look out and look after each other. It's not you or me, it's you and me. I would want to suggest that we all suffer from these mood changes and so on and so on. You know, these emotional problems associated with something like a pandemic or something like Brexit. So then I'd like to take complete ownership and put my own self up there. This portrait of myself, which I altered on the computer, because it already shows a shadow. It took this in an art exhibition, by the way, and I wasn't even sad, but the picture I've turned into, I've actually adjusted it to show the blueness. And sometimes we use blue as a way to say, well, you're feeling blue, you're feeling down. I want to take ownership for all these feelings. Everything I'm talking about here, I feel and I experience. So there's a blueness here, there's a darkness here, there's a shadow of oneself. I feel like by coming out of a union, a union of 20 or 30 countries, and becoming isolated as one country, I feel like a form of shadow of myself. I feel disconnected. There's a disconnection here. There's a splitting of the personality here. There's a realness and a not so real. There's a wonder, is this really real? You know, and also with the pandemic, many a times I've wondered, am I living in a parallel universe, or is this really real? It's really hard to figure out. There's a sense of isolation, you know? So I just wanted to, first of all, acknowledge that this impacts me and those around me. I know. So we talked about entertainment and that being gone. I'm a creative person as well, and I took to drawing during the pandemic. I'm going to run through a quick series of the drawings that I did, maybe comment on one or two of them. But I started to draw and share these drawings, these pieces of cartoon art with the world, with my friends, by WhatsApp, by Twitter, and so on and so forth. So I started to draw these images and put some words to them, just trying to draw things. The Queen gave a speech, for example. So this was highlighting the use of a mask and a symbol, an African symbol on that. The Queen here gave a speech. So I thought about another Queen, which is Aretha Franklin, and what she said about your social contribution to your community being, that is something of greatness. So I started to do images, looking at the inside that glasses, you can see the R number, keeping it under 1, the reproductive number, keeping it under 1, trying to talk, promote the use of masks and so on. Talk about these bats, talking about, not taking blame for the whole thing. Churches being closed. What does it mean? World leaders saying clean hands. And where's the people to the world leaders saying, well, what about, you have to have pure hearts. Stephen Lawrence, who is a young man here who, if we have time, we'll go more into it, but is a symbol of racial diversity in this country. Resurrection Sunday, all these things. This one in particular, taking two big artists, Jean-Michel Basquiat, which is an African-American artist, died sadly at age 27, and Edvard Munch, European artist, putting the two styles together. Don't worry, I got some face going. Thank you, sir. Showing an image of kindness here. It was Mental Health Week at the time, and it was about kindness. This is a guy, footballer here, who campaigned for the government to give more food, continue the food program to the children. A warning to the president saying that, you don't inject, or, listen to the advice about, these things. He's just responding sort of to the political environment. George Floyd came along during this whole period. And I talked about mentality and weaponizing racism in Celtron Park, impunity and bigoted homicide, Minneapolis, Martin Luther King quote, and then moving on to George Floyd and so on, and trying to, comment on these things. And I sent a message to the church that the church needed to speak out. And the vicar of a church saw the cartoon got her a response, and she responded by saying, can I publish the poem in the Church Times? Interestingly, it was the graphic that appealed to her. And then the words, she then read the words and thought, can I put that in the Church Times? I said, absolutely, you can. And then all of that, and then again, Black Lives Matter, the whole idea, commented on all of that. As a result, a magazine, The Conscious Lawyer, International Lawyer magazine, approached me and said, would I allow them to publish their cartoons in one of the issues of their magazines? And of course I did. And that was the issue, that's the front page. And they gave me 4 whole pages in the magazine. So something mine is a feeble art, by the way. I'm not a cartoonist, I'm not an artist or that way. I just do something just for my own self, to entertain myself, to keep myself well. And then it made it into an international magazine, 4 whole pages of them selecting bits and pieces of the art. Then I took that forward. I made more art in the community for community centers. And then this I saw on a road in my, near to me as a crate, and I thought I'd do something with it. And I turned them around, painted the English flag on it. And for those of you who know, the English flag is not exactly like the rebel flag in the South of America, but it does have a connotation of sort of rejection. You can take this flag out when football is being played and it's not controversial. Otherwise, it's been hijacked a little bit by the right-wing groups in this country, like the British National Party and so on, as a symbol of foreigners should stay out and this is just England only. And I turned it around and I created this painting on it, and beside it was this suitcase. The suitcase was upturned and so on. And I left it there as a symbol of, and then I changed the words. I put some words on it, which I'll show you as the last slide. I'll show it to you. But I show the life of how foreigners, that upturned suitcase represents how people can come from various nations in this country, contribute, make a great contribution, and their lives can be upturned. And those pillows falling out represent them giving comfort to a country. For example, the NHS, many of the NHS, the National Health Service in this country, came from abroad and helped to build the culture. I saw those building material there, I put them on top to suggest that this nation have been built by people from all over the world. And then I thought people might just move it along. It's on the curtilage, so you can do this kind of thing. But what they did, they put the debris in the crates. And this is the words I wrote on it. Welcome world, we love migrants. And I thought this might be moved on, but they actually didn't understand I wanted to leave the suitcase there, which was already on the streets. And the people of the neighborhood, they tucked it behind and just left it there as a piece of art installation for the neighborhood. So then that gave me a warm feeling that the people who lived in nearby neighborhoods actually would preserve such a thing, would actually allow for the redefinition of the flag from something that is controversial or negative or hostile towards foreigner to something that is really positive. So I felt like the galleries are closed, let me open them on the streets. So this is my whole response to actually being active in terms of just doing something I've got a little bit of creative flair within me. Let me share it with my community and anybody who will listen, really. And then I'll close on this slide. Through the lockdown, I've found parks. I've discovered parks near and far. And parks have a healing effect on me. And as I say, my city, I don't know about your city, where you're from, but my city is blessed with amazing, fantastic parks, and many of them, and they're close by and they're far away. And they create a sense for me of well-being. So I find myself going to parks a lot, taking a walk, sitting down, having my lunch there, maybe having a drink late at night and so on. We don't have those laws over here in England. You can actually have a glass of wine out in the park, you know? And I'm telling you, this is just a fantastic thing. Now, I'd like to close on this last word. Wherever you are, you should find what it is for you that give you mental well-being. For me, it's parks, art, and so on. It might be a museum for you. It might be family for you. It might be taking a long drive for you. But you need to understand how your mood might be impacted by big events happening, and then how to counteract the negativity by finding that thing which gives you a little comfort in your own life and practice that. Reach out to people and know that you're not alone. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, David. I think that was really thought-provoking and insightful there. I'm sure you all noticed that me being a little bit younger and less experienced, I think I can bring a bit of a unique and different perspective here. So I worked in London the summer of 2019 with IES, and then this past summer, like so many people my age, had a virtual internship due to the impact of COVID, and as a result was able to work with our London office quite a bit on a project or two this summer. So while a little bit younger and less experienced, I think it's really interesting that I do have two unique different experiences to be able to compare the work environment between the US and the UK, and hopefully particularly as it pertains to COVID. And I think with that being said, while there are quite a few differences, I think when comparing cultures and cultural norms, I don't think there's a one size fits all approach. So, I'm sure many of the things that I'm going to say, some of you have had contradictory experiences, but I think over my few experiences, I think I've pinpointed a couple that maybe seem a little consistent to me at least. So I think in light of COVID, one of the things that I really picked up on before this pandemic changed so many things in our lives was that a lot of people that I worked with in the UK used video meetings and Zoom calls and Google Hangouts much more frequently than my US colleagues. I found that the way I keep in touch with a lot of my previous employers in the US is through a random text or email here and there. But for my summer in London, I still keep up and stay in touch with a lot of my previous supervisors, and it's all over video calls. So I think in terms of adapting to this COVID world, I think at least from my experience, it seems like my London colleagues have had a bit more of a head start on sort of the transition to work from home and being more experienced with all this technology. And I think with that being said, in terms of always having the camera on, I think there's a bit of an extra emphasis on being professional when it comes to working in London. I remember walking around the city of London in my first week and trying to, just sort of observe everybody and see, how I could fit in. And everybody was wearing a navy suit with black shoes, and it was like the uniform there almost. And it was something that was unspoken and not said, but everybody knew the rules somehow. And there was a particular day in which I wore brown shoes to the office with my navy suit. And I was told that was not at all the norm, and in fact, very off base. So, I think there's a certain style that fits and a certain professional work look that is strictly adhered to. And what I found in New York is that there's a lot more leniency with your office styles. And to sort of compare that, again, my virtual internship this past summer with an investment bank in New York, we were encouraged to sort of wear whatever we wanted to, as long as we didn't have video calls with the client or a partner of the firm. And so for me, most days this meant sweatpants. I'm sure a lot of you work from home might do the same, but I think there's just an extra air of professionalism there. I think this next one probably won't come as a surprise to anybody, but I found that feedback in the US is a lot more blunt and openly honest, whereas in the UK things might get shielded a little bit more, and there's an extra layer of politeness or correctness before you have to unwrap some of the real constructive criticism. So for example, I can't say for certain that this is what I've been told, but in the US, maybe some less than satisfactory work might get a response of, this isn't good enough, or try that one again. But in the UK, I found, something more similar to, thanks for your hard work on this. A couple of small suggestions are, and those two sentences in the US and the UK largely mean the same thing, but just worded quite a bit differently. But with that being said, a little bit more professionalism. For my earlier point, I find that in the UK, once you get outside of the office, things change drastically. So I spent not a lot, but a few early afternoons with some of my managers and supervisors, going out to the pub and enjoying a couple beers and sort of relaxing and taking off work, maybe a little bit more often than we should have. But I found that, my bosses and, CEOs and co-founders were, happy to do those things and talk about things outside of the office, whether it was, my travel plans that I had for that summer, or, what I was thinking in comparison between London and the US, and just, how I felt about how the experience was going. I think that shows a lot about the superiors that I worked for, that they were really curious to get to know me outside of the work setting, and of all places, at the pub, most likely. And I think the sort of the US comparison to this social interaction, more often than not, is like a workplace lunchtime pizza party in the break room or something like that. So I found that a lot of my interactions with my colleagues in London were more fulfilling and much more personal. And with that being said, I think there is a lot more of a personal touch when it comes to work in the UK. And like I said, a lot of people taking the time to get to know you. This past summer, like I mentioned in my virtual internship, when getting acquainted with our London team in their office, every single person on the team that I'd be working with took 30 minutes out of their day to have a phone call with me and just talk to me about what I'd be doing, and before long, we'd talk about things that were completely unrelated to work. And you know, I really did appreciate the gesture, but I think the American in me was very annoyed because I had a lot of other work I had to do. So I think a bit of a clash in that sense. But really, when I told my New York colleagues this, they were, you know, really shocked that this was the case, that people would really like take that much time out of their day in such a busy schedule to like really, you know, get to know me on a much more personal level. And then again, you know, a direct relation to somebody my age. The other intern who I worked with, who was an Oxford student, when we were on phone calls, he would, you know, frequently send me Skype messages and personal messages during phone calls and just say, you know, how's your day or how are things going, which is just completely out of the blue and unheard of compared to my other New York interns. So I think that's something I found really consistent is, you know, the personal touch that comes with getting to know your colleagues before you start work, and how that differs in the US. I think, you know, if you're going to like Google the differences between the US and the UK in terms of work environment, I think something common you'll see is that Londoners or British people will work less. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think the hours are roughly the same, obviously depending on what you're doing. But I think the main difference I've found is that in the UK, there might be more of an emphasis on holidays and taking breaks and really, you know, going back to what David was saying, taking time out of your day to really focus on your mental health, and, you know, being able to put work aside for an evening, which, you know, I have not entirely found to be the case. So a couple summers ago with my IES experience, all the founders of the company I worked for took at least one holiday during my 8 weeks in London, which is something that I cannot say I've had a similar experience with working in the US. And, you know, additionally, I found that project that we would work on, a lot of the team members would talk about, you know, the amount of days left until they could get, you know, a long weekend off and enjoy some time off. Whereas New York, I think a lot of people look forward to wrapping up a project only so they can start the next one. So I think there really is that extra emphasis in the UK and London in particular of, you know, taking time out of the day to really focus and take a break and I guess reflect and think about what you've done. Again, an analyst I worked with this past summer in London, she took the afternoon off for her birthday and went out to a nice dinner. In comparison, the same summer, I worked until 2 a.m. on my birthday and had cold leftovers. So I think there's definitely an extra emphasis in terms of your bosses and superiors of giving you time off. And then I think this largely translates into how teams work together between the two countries. So in my experiences in the UK, I've been invited to pretty much every single meeting that the team has had, even if it doesn't really relate or is relevant to what I'm directly doing. And I found that teams are much more inclusive in the UK. You know, a lot more company-wide meetings where everybody can sort of share their opinion, and meetings where, you know, if you're not expected to speak, you're definitely expected to listen. I think there's always a reason that I was invited to meetings, and, you know, a lot of times it maybe was to take notes or do different administrative tasks, but you know, I was always expected to contribute in the end. And I haven't found that to be the case in the US, whereas meetings are a lot tighter and focusing on, you know, getting in and getting out as quick as you can. So I've really found that, you know, teams are a lot more inclusive of the broader group. And I think with that being said, there's a lot more shared successes amongst the team in terms of recognizing individual accomplishments. So, you know, just to wrap up and be really brief, you know, those are some of the just differences I found, but I largely think that the two countries are very similar in terms of work. You know, some of those are pretty nitpicky and not entirely, I guess, tangible or manifest themselves at all times. But, you know, I just want to say that through my experience at IES, it's already paid off in terms of another global and international work experience. So I'm very impressed, and honestly, I was quite surprised that just from one summer, how much I learned and been able to translate into a completely different work environment. Yeah, I think to me, honestly, the biggest difference that I've found among all of this is the spelling between the two countries. I just can't get it right at all times. It's the Z's and S's for me. So I'm sure a lot of Americans and British people that have worked in both countries have found themselves mixing up the spelling quite a bit. But yeah, thank you all again. Really appreciated being invited on this panel. Yeah, I guess we'll turn it over to Q&A now. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you, our panelists, so much for your wonderful expertise and giving us the update. from overseas. And what I think that maybe is a takeaway for all of us is that really we're all so connected and sharing in so many of the same emotions and experiences around the world. So it again just shows that connection that we find through study abroad. So I welcome you all. Please put your questions in chat. We would like to be able to ask the speakers. We do have a short time for question and answer. We do have one question right now. We have from, I think it's Kai is how you would say her name. There she is. In your opinion, David Nieta, let's see, we just moved. How do you recommend keeping that delicate balance of staying informed, but then not being overwhelmed with the constant reports of economic and social instability?
I think it's a very good question, Kai, and I think my panelists should help me to answer it. But what I will say is that you put your finger on the button there. It's a real challenge. If you want to stay an informed person and not be overwhelmed by the negative news that's out there, it's quite a challenge. And I think one of the things I would recommend, and I recommend it strongly for myself too, is to not allow the last hour or two prior to bedtime to be consumed with the news, and not to allow the first few moments of waking up to reaching for the phone and checking out the news. That's the first thing, to preserve, just to keep yourself intact with your unbroken sleep. That whole period, you should keep as much peace around it as possible, and much of yourself around it as possible. And that might mean keeping your devices outside of the place where you sleep. Keep them in the front room or so on, and check them later. The other thing to recognize is that I think that once you become an IES alumni, you're special, you're different. So of course the news will impact upon you, but you're a world changer. And therefore, as bad as the news may be, you'll still remain an agent. One of the things we're all blessed with online here, if we're all alumni, is that we have the great privilege of tertiary education and the great privilege of connections, of positions, and so on. And we cannot afford inaction. We have to remind ourselves always that we have some power and we can push back. And we need to be thinking all the time of formulating new ways of forming alliances with your fellow alumni, with people from other places, with professionals and mentors and mentees and whatever, and form these strong alliances to push back against whatever you consider to be injustice in this world. And there's plenty of it to go around. And I do reiterate what I said. You're not alone. You can reach out, and you'll be surprised to find out that when you reach out, people are more than happy to help, come alongside, collaborate, to help, to support in your vision to tackle this thing. Just remember, a cord of 3 strands are stronger than a cord of 1. It's not easily broken when you come together and you collaborate. So that would be part of the response, but I think there's a vaster response, and I think members of my panel will be happy to address that question as well.
I'll jump in on that if that's okay. I think it's really important to know yourself and really to know what is healthy and good for you, because everybody's different. So you know, if watching too much news is bringing you down, turn it off. You know, my husband and I are under lockdown together with our daughter, and he loves to watch the news all the time, and it really actually gets to me after a while. So I have to leave the room and go somewhere else. So I think it's really understanding and knowing yourself. I also have noticed that throughout the last 7 months, it's waves. It's up and down. You know, we have these waves of, okay, everything's fine and we feel good, and then there's waves when I'm feeling really depressed. And I think it's important to recognize it and to take care of it and prioritize that. If that means seeing a therapist, if that means exercising more, if that means, as David has pointed out, you know, mental health is so important, and we're in unprecedented circumstances. So it is okay to say I'm weak or I'm, not doing well, or reach out, as David said. I also think for me, I've found that there are people just on my community and on my street and everywhere that have very different points of view with regard to how COVID is being handled. So, there are those who have supported the government all the way through this, and there's others who think that COVID isn't real. So there is such a strong view, and it's getting stronger the longer this goes on, about how to deal with it and what's wrong and who's right and this and that. And everybody starts vocalizing it. And it gets very contentious. And these are people who are neighbors, who are friends. And I have to, for me at least, I have to step back. I just, have to be able to say, I'm not going to engage in that conversation because I don't think it's healthy for me. So for that is my way of reacting to certain things. And I think everybody needs to understand themselves well enough to know how to take care of themselves. That would be my suggestion.
Great. We have another question, again, directed to David. With the Black Lives Movement, the election here in the US is keeping that movement sort of alive and giving it energy and momentum. Is the conversation still strong and very current in UK amid Brexit and COVID issues?
Yes, indeed. That conversation remains very strong here. And with regards to issues affecting Black people in this country, it's good for people to know that Black people have an unbroken presence in this country since the formation. The first governor of this country in a Roman Empire was a Black man, was an African called Septimus Severus. And throughout our history, there's always been the phrase Black Lives Matter would have always been applicable to British culture as it is to American culture. And so we share so much in common. And so we've had the police brutality, we've had suspicious death in custody, we have all the issues you have, we have the parallel of it here. And we look to America and we see what's going on there, and we are often very supportive, and we're in solidarity. And recently, we've had here what's known as the Windrush scandal, where the government some years ago developed a hostile policy where they were kicking people outside of the country who came from the West Indies mostly. And it's become known as the Windrush scandal. And many of your African-American celebs have been supporting that cause here, so that we have a lot in common. But the thing to say about all of this is that for us, it feels like cycles. It feels like we have, and I don't know if you will relate to this in America and other parts of the world, but it feels like the door gets opened a little bit when there's a disaster or an incident. You may want to think Rodney King. You may want to think Breonna Taylor. You have these, it's a stock market cycle. It goes up, and then there's an open opportunity to talk about these things. Well, we have our Christopher Alders, Joy Gardners. We can give you a name for every name you can give us. We are one, we are connected. And it feels like when these opportunities come, when these sad events happen and there's an opportunity to talk about race, it feels like a door that's sprung, that's just waiting to shut on the conversation and the dialogue. And this feels like an opportunity for us to try and take off the springs off those doors, or maybe remove the door so that the light can come in, and so that we can keep this opportunity open as long enough. You say your election is keeping the door open, our Brexit is keeping this door open, these issues around COVID have highlighted issues around racial disparities among communities. What we know from human psychology is that once it's died down, it goes back to the status quo. And the status quo tends to be white supremacy and oppression of people who are marginalized. But here's an opportunity for us to come together from all communities, develop allyship, work together to actually use this opportunity. It's such a vast one. When you can't breathe, when you call for your mama, that is so deep and it's so emotional. And we could honor this sadness by keeping this door open forever and establish within it full inclusion and participation and racial equity in our time. I believe we can do it.
Amen to that. Let's see. I think that might be the question and answer session. We don't have any new questions, so I'm going to hand over the presentation to Dr. Gregory Hess. And thank you all again for attending.
Hey, well, thank you, Jody. And I just want to thank each speaker kind of, individually. Diana, you're, helping us understand the, dynamics and of both politics and culture associated with COVID and Brexit were very helpful. A lot of details I didn't know very much about, and I followed pretty closely, so it was really quite helpful. David, of course, you had these powerful and mellifluous insights and words were really powerful, and I know really spoke to a lot of people. And Mike, I really appreciate having lived it as well, both as a study abroad student and actually having worked in the UK for a while. I loved, your understanding and nuance of kind of indirect forms of communication in the UK versus the US. I really appreciated how you kind of uncovered those and how much you kind of appreciated those differences. But what all three speakers really spoke of, pointed to was the importance in these difficult times of connectedness. How important connectedness means to all of us, which is in many ways why so many people are on this Zoom meeting right now. It also, all three people, all three of our panelists also spoke about both the importance of how to survive these very difficult times, but also to keep an eye on how to thrive, even in these difficult survival times, how to think about and keep an eye on how in these difficult times we can not only survive, but how we can also point towards our North Star of ultimately thriving. And I've only been the CEO of IES for about 75 days. I have met very few of the workers at IES in person. Most I've met in Zoom calls like this. But I do want to tell you that we're the same kind of organization that these themes we're the same kind of organization that speaks to the themes that people have talked to today about how to maintain that connectedness and how to be that kind of global organization that helps develop global leadership in all the ways that we saw in our panelists today. And we're also talking a lot about both surviving and also thriving. So I can tell you that we're doing a good job of keeping our hibernation going well. We've retained, our best and our brightest. So many of the people who will make IES rebound when the world reawakens, are both on this Zoom and and still thinking about how to make not only keep IES going during these difficult times, but also how we can thrive. So we're working on both of those facets right now. Just in closing, speaking about connectedness, one of the big things that's coming up in December 1st is kind of the an overall day of Giving Tuesday. The Day of Giving is an important time throughout the world where people think about giving back to different organizations. There's so many that have great needs now. I'd like you to think about that, both for your own personal gifting, but also for your appreciation for whatever circumstances you're in right now. I know we know they could be worse, and we know there'll be a better day going forward. With respect to IES Abroad, we're one of those organizations that has done an exceptional outreach to make sure that the kind of life-changing experience that each of you had will also be available to the next generation of IES students, those who are part of the new majority students who may not come from from wealthy backgrounds, but people who've not had from backgrounds who not had as much experience with study abroad. So we'd like you to keep us in mind as well. But in any case, I do want to thank you for being here and look forward to our next opportunity to get together. I do want to thank once again the panelists today. You just did a wonderful job and it really raised my spirits on